On this Creation Sunday, and as Pastor was saying, it's good just to take a Sunday and just really enlarge upon the things that we've heard and know from the Bible, because again, there's a lot of voice out there saying that the Bible can't be trusted, evolution has been proven, it's a slam dunk, it is proven science, and the thing is that is not the case. And so we like to take these Sundays to just kind of remind ourselves of the evidences that we see to show that creationism is the true story of what has happened in terms of where animals came from and so forth like that. And so this is the fourth one I've done. And so this is going to have some things from past presentations, but also something as recent as just last year. And so hopefully it'll be something that will be encouragement to you, and maybe something you could share with someone that's kind of battling with this question of evolution. And so I have some of my credentials up here. Again, I don't want to misrepresent that I'm like someone that works for Ken Ham and I use all this physics knowledge for that or anything. It's not the case. I don't have time for that. But I have been around those, and the University of Illinois has a very good science department, especially physics. When I came, it was number one in the United States in condensed matter physics. And so it's a very good school, and in talking to them, there's a lot of people that, would talk to me about it and say, why do you put up such a fight? Why don't you just kind of hold to kind of that millions of years, or a day is a million years and so forth. Why do you put up such a fight? I was like, because the Bible's true. I'm not going to compromise on that. And so again, not everyone in science is on that side. So just wanted to reassure you that and hopefully give you some things to think about today. And so the title of this is Evolution, Has It Been Proven Yet? Evolution has had 160 years. Darwin put out his works in 1859, and so we're going to look at some of the things to see if it's been proven or not. And so when it comes to evolution, first we have to have an idea what it is, and so I have evolution in a nutshell here. First off, evolution starts with a single cell. Okay, so again, when it comes to the sciences, they do have a story that goes before the cell, but evolution itself starts with a single cell. Okay, how it got there, that was not what Darwin was addressing. Then what he said was that these cells have mutations. In other words, you have a cell, and as it reproduces, it gets a little bit different. Okay, there's a mutation, and perhaps that mutation is beneficial. And so what happens is it kind of builds on that mutation, compounds and compounds, and you get different kinds of cells. And as those cells get more and more complex, then at some point you start to have animals, okay? And those animals now are kind of competing, okay? And so natural selection says, which species are best suited for the environment. And so natural selection kind of weeds out which animals survive, which ones don't. And then you have, again, roughly 1 billion years, it's hundreds of millions, okay? But over the course of those hundreds of millions of years of natural selection and mutations, you finally have the animals and the plants we have today. Okay, so again, that's an oversimplification, but those are kind of the main ingredients there for evolution. But if you're going to be in the sciences, you can't just put forth a hypothesis and say it is true. You have to verify the claims. And so, as I said this a few years ago, I just love the illustration. It's thinking about have you ever seen Antique Roadshow? And how they bring a trinket to the Antique Roadshow, and they want to know, have they found that thing at the garage sale is going to make them rich? Okay? And so when they bring it to the show, experts look at it, and there's things that they're looking for and things that can't be there also. If it's something from the 1800s, they look at it and say, okay, this is the way that they made furniture. There's going to be these types of nails used. There's going to be this type of craftsmanship used. There's going to be a maker's mark. There's going to be these things that need to be there, but also there's things that can't be there. For instance, if they look under the table and they see that the bottom of it's made out of plastic that says Walmart on it, not a good sign that it's from the 1700s, okay? And so again, they're looking for both things that they should see and things that they should not see. And when it comes to evolution, the same thing is true. So, where do we look? Where do we look to see if evolution is true? And there's really two sources. The first one is the fossils, okay? So you look at all the fossils and see if the fossil location and also just the fossils themselves, if they match up with an evolutionary mindset, okay? The second thing is living things. If you look at living things, you look at the cells, look at the DNA, what can we find from that to maybe back up evolution? And so first off, we're going to look at the fossil record. And what should we see? The first thing we should see is that if evolution starts from a cell and becomes more and more complex, that the deepest rock layer should have the simplest forms of life. That if we look at those deepest ones, we should see a very, the simplest things are made, and then above that it's going to stack and go up that way. So again, at the very deepest layers, you have the simplest forms, and along the way, you should see missing links or transitional forms. Because remember, evolution is kind of blind chance, right? As it forms this, it makes a mistake, and that thing dies and gets buried. And then it makes a mistake here, and it dies and gets buried. And so evolution should have these transitional forms also in these deepest layers. As you go up, you should see a gradual increase in complexity. So the simplest animals are at the bottom, and as you go up, a little bit more complex, and that's how it should go if evolution is true. And third, that if you're to look at one species and follow it along, you should see a gradual compounding of mutations that results in new things. Okay? That's what we should see if evolution is true. So I like cartoons, okay? It helps me to visualize better. So imagine this here is the oldest layers, deep, deep down, and these are the more recent layers, and here's us up here walking around on the ground, okay? So what it should look like if evolution is true. At the bottom, you should have the simplest life form. Now, I'm not saying that evolution says it's a fish, but I'm just saying let's just have a picture here. So imagine the simplest animal is this blue fish, but evolution didn't quite get it right because it doesn't have a mouth. And that's not going to survive real well. It needs to eat. So evolution tries again, and it makes a mouth, but it's missing this back tail area, and so this one doesn't survive too well. It makes one with a mouth and a back tail, but it's missing this top fin, and finally evolution gets it right. We have our simplest animal at the deepest layers with all the transitional forms alongside of it buried. Well, the next layer, you have your blue fish, because you know what? It is the best thing evolution's ever produced, and it makes it to the next generation. But evolution marches forward, and it says, you know what? As if evolution's a thing that I can think. I want to make something even better. So evolution makes this fish. I know it's kind of hard to see, but you have to trust me. It's an orange fish, and the fins kind of have these lobes now. And this fish, I don't know, maybe it's faster, maybe it's bigger, has sharper teeth, I don't know. But it's a better version of the first fish. And so in that layer, we should see both the blue fish and the orange fish fossils. Next layer, those fish make it again because they are just doing really well, and then evolution marches forward and says, you know what? I'm going to take these little lobes here, I'm going to make legs out of them. So it makes a salamander. And so now we have salamanders buried with the fish, and then it's not settled there. It says, I'm going to make a frog too, because they're kind of like fish. And so evolution is making more and more complex things, and they're buried in this layer. The next layer, sadly, the blue fish goes away. The blue fish was doing great, but then when the salamander and frog came along, it just couldn't compete, and it loses out and it goes extinct. But these three are there, and so they're still buried in this layer, and evolution marches forward, and now we have a beaver, because we need to eventually get to land-dwelling things. So now we have a beaver, and so this thing is more complex, and its fossils are found in this layer, and as we go up, we see, sadly, the salamander also disappears because that beaver is feisty, and so these things disappear, and they're not in this layer, and we see some more complexity. And that's kind of an oversimplification, but the basic idea of simple animals buried deep, more complex as you go up. That's what evolution predicts. Now, what do we actually see? Well, when you look in the deepest layers, you find nothing. When you look above that, you find nothing. And then you get to a layer where you find most major animal phyla with no transitional forms. In other words, you don't see simple, few, a little bit more, a little bit more. You see in this layer most animals buried in that layer. And then on the top layer, we have the rest of the animals. So again, you'd think like, maybe like dinosaurs and stuff here, and then you have people up here. And so that's what you actually see. You see what's called the Cambrian explosion. Because evolution didn't think that. Evolution thought it would build upon itself. And when they found all this, that was a problem. So, what do scientists say? Here's a quote. The Cambrian explosion has generated extensive scientific debate. The seemingly rapid appearance of fossils in the primordial strata was noted as early as the 1840s, and in 1859, Charles Darwin discussed it as one of the main objections that could be made against the theory of evolution by natural selection. That this was something that even in his day, he knew didn't add up. And it was a great objection that could be made. And when it comes to the other thing, there was the missing links. Remember how we said that there should be transitional forms? They didn't find those. Look what scientists say here. This is Darwin himself. Why then is not every geological formation, every stratum full of such intermediate links? He thought they should be everywhere. Geology assuredly does not reveal any such finely graduated organic chain, and this perhaps is the most obvious and gravest objection which can be urged against my theory. And look at this here, focus on this. The explanation lies, as I believe, in the extreme imperfection of the geological record. He was hoping that though they had no transitional forms, and that is the greatest objection against his theory, that as we dig more and more through the decades, we'll finally find these transitional forms, and it's going to put this thing to rest. Update. No transitional forms found. We still have no transitional forms. And so what science has done is they've started saying things like, well, this animal you discover is kind of weird. It must be the link between this and this. No, that's not what a transitional form is. A transitional form is, here's an animal with the start of wings, but they're not functional. Here's the same animal with wings that are a little bit bigger, but still not functional. And you could see a progression from no wings to full wings. We don't see that at all. But let's look at a specific case here. So, again, we're looking for things to make evolution true. One thing is, what if we could track one species or one animal through the millions of years and see, do we see complexity or compounding of mutations for new functionality? And this is going to be another question we answer along the way is, if we don't see an animal in a particular rock layer, does that mean those two animals didn't exist together? So in other words, if the dinosaurs are down here and humans are being found here, their remains, does that mean they didn't live at the same time? Well, let's see if we can answer that. Well, the coelacanth is a good example. I'm sure you've heard of it. The reason why you've heard of it is because it is just an amazing discovery that science doesn't have an explanation for. They found a fossil of this fish in the 1830s, and it is a unique fish, okay? It has kind of lobes and so forth, and so when they discovered it, they thought, wow, this is an interesting fish. And they found it in the Devonian Cretaceous layer, okay? So again, evolution believes that there's names to these layers. Each layer has a particular year, like 100 million, 50 million, so forth, and it was found in this particular layer. It was believed to exist between 66 and 400 million years ago. In other words, the furthest down they find these fossils of the coelacanth are layers associated with 400 million years, and the ones that are basically 400 million years and you still find coelacanth in it, 66 million, above that you don't see any more fossils. So they believed that this fish went extinct at 66 million years ago, okay? And they believe that it was destroyed in some big catastrophe. If you ever see catastrophe, just think asteroid, okay? They don't usually have, they kind of give you some options, but usually asteroid is the favorite answer. Well, here's the thing. There's a problem with that because they actually found one living. They found one off the coast of Africa in 1948, and so from the 1830s to 1948, they thought this was an extinct animal for 100 years, and then they found a live one. And when they looked at the animal and looked at it with regards to the fossils, they found no major changes. If evolution's true, then animals should be changing and getting better and better and better, and what they found was there were no major changes to the fish. It's exactly the same, and that's why they called it a living fossil. They said, you know what, this must be a weird thing. This must not be the normal thing, so let's call it a living fossil. It's a weird thing. It's not. This is what we see is that there's no major changes, and this is not just the only case. But anyway, so let me give you a picture so you can kind of see what's going on here. So in these lowest layers, they did not see the coelacanth, okay? they found the deepest ones they could find are in the late Paleozoic thing. Okay, this is the layer they give to 400 million years, okay? They found some above that in the Mesozoic layer. They said, okay, it must have existed then too, but then they found none in the Cenozoic. And they said, because there's none here, they must have gone extinct. And they believed that for 100 years until they found the fish off of Africa. So here's a pop quiz. Did the coelacanth, whoa, what happened there? Okay. Did the coelacanth exist during this particular time? It's like this. Like when we look at like the records of Jesus in the Bible, okay? We have record of him up till the age of 12, right? And then he comes on the scene at 30. Question, did Jesus exist from the age of 12 to 30? Yes, because we have a record of him before and we have a record of him after, right? And so for here, if they have fossils of this animal here and we see it off the coast of Africa here, it had to exist in this layer. And so here's the question. If it existed in that layer without any fossils, could it have existed in this layer? And the answer, as a scientist, has to be maybe. Okay? We can't say definitively, okay, if I'm a scientist, but I can't rule it out because I have one example of an animal that existed, but there's no fossils, and therefore it could be down here too. And this is not the only example. These animals where you see them in the fossil record and in the layers, and all of a sudden you see them disappear and they're alive today, they're called Lazarus taxons. Okay, that's the scientific term. And they believe that these animals legitimately go extinct and then evolution kickstarts it again and gets them going again after millions of years of disappearing. And there's all kinds of examples. I don't want to get into all the details. Last time I talked about this one a little bit more, the Tuatara. But again, there's a lot of examples of these that are absent in these layers but are present today. Okay. Now, we just talked about things that we should see. What should we see? Basic animals down here and getting more and more complex as you go up. We're not seeing that. But if evolution is true, there's some things that we better not see or evolution is going to be false. Here's a couple. Number one, if we find fossils in the wrong rock layers. If we're going to believe that these animals are 500 million years old and these are 400 and these are 300, I better not see old animals up here and younger animals down here, right? And on top of that, and we'll get into this in more detail, there better not be any old fossils that are acting young. So, the question is, do we ever find fossils in the wrong strata or in the wrong rock layer? And the answer is yes. We do find older fossils in younger strata. In other words, animals that should have only existed here, we do find them in the upper rock layers. Those are called zombie or reworked fossils. They are common. And again, science has this tendency of giving names to things to make you think they're weird. Okay? So, zombie fossil. Okay? Why do they call it that? Because they say, well, these fossils originally were buried down here, but somehow they worked themselves up to this layer. Okay, maybe that happened. Let's call them zombies. They're weird. But that's the thing. You see it all the time. But they even see younger fossils that are deeper down. Now, how does that work? Well, they call those downwash fossils. In other words, it must have had a lot of water, and there must have been some sort of catastrophic event, and those things kind of settled down lower than they should be. They're in the wrong layer. It doesn't fit evolution. But here's the thing that I've talked about every time, and the reason why is because it is so startling. And there may be some people in this room that have not seen this before. Here's just one article, okay? Dinosaur Shocker. Probing 68 million year old T-Rex, Mary Schweitzer stumbled upon astonishing signs of life that may radically change our view of the ancient beasts. This scientist took some bones, some T-Rex bones, and found soft tissue in them. Okay? And so, this is back in 2006. The reason it hasn't been discovered before is no right-thinking paleontologist, I love that, would do what Mary did with her specimens. We don't go to all this effort to dig this stuff out of the ground to then destroy it in acid. The regular scientific thing was, these bones are old, let's dig them up, and let's just keep them the way they are. They're beautiful. And this woman did something crazy. She said, I'm going to take one of those bones, I'm going to dissolve it in acid and see what happens. And she found soft tissue. It had been held back because of an evolutionary mindset. And the thing is, that was in 2006, and up to 2013, they kept working on this because the science community knew what this meant. There's a problem. And so there were some objections. Here's the first one. Scientific objection number one, maybe it was foreign soft tissue. Maybe they were working with two different specimens. They had the T-Rex here and something over here that was more recent, and they must have mixed them up. And after investigation, they found that that was not the case, as indeed was protein from the dinosaur. Scientific objection number two, maybe it was just a fluke. I mean, we have hundreds, thousands of specimens. Maybe this is just a weird one. It's an anomaly. It's not going to happen again. The researchers also analyzed other fossils for the presence of soft tissue and found it was present in about half of their samples going back to the Jurassic period. Half. Not one, half. But that's not the only story. You may say, well, that's just one isolated case, and sure, those, half of those, so forth. Here's another story. Back in 2014, lawsuit, CSUN scientists fired after soft tissue found in dinosaur fossil. Upon examination of the horn, this is talking about Triceratops, okay? Upon examination of the horn under a high-powered microscope back at CSUN, Backus says Armitage was fascinated to find soft tissue on the sample. A discovery Backus said stunned members of the school's biology department. Why does it stun them? Because of the evolutionary mindset. This should not be happening. The discovery is the latest in several recent and controversial soft tissue finds by archaeologists. These are quotes taken right from the article. This is happening more and more and more. In fact, I don't have time for it, but I have other slides. There was a discovery in 2013 of dinosaur embryos that were 100 or 200 million years old, and they had soft tissue in them. And then, in 2017, they found soft tissue on dinosaur ribs. And they're saying that is really beyond bizarre because usually you find them in thicker bones, and these are thinner, more delicate bones. How did they find it there? So this is happening all the time. Now, what do scientists say? Meanwhile, Schweitzer's research has been hijacked by young Earth creationists who insist that dinosaur soft tissue couldn't possibly survive millions of years. So they say, okay, we know what creationists are going to do. They're going to see this and they're going to jump all over it. So we got to stop that thing. So they bring this out. And this is how they defend their case. How they disprove us? Number one, they point out that Mary Schweitzer is a Christian that disagrees with creationists. How is that a scientific argument? If science has to go to, well, she doesn't believe it, what does that have to do with anything? The facts are the facts. And number two, they offer explanations that are far-fetched and not testable. The original explanation for the T-Rex soft tissue was that it could be that these dinosaurs had a lot of iron content, and as a result, iron acted as a preserving agent. Could iron be a preserving agent? I guess, but how are you going to test that? Do you have a bone that you can test for 50 million years and get back to us and see if it worked? You can't test it. So they just give you some far-fetched thing. And here's the thing. Since that time, like I said with a rib, it's not going to work for a rib. And so they just give you explanations that aren't going to work. And I love this quote. I looked at this and I looked at this and I thought this can't be. Red blood cells don't preserve. Right from her mouth. Because she knows what it means. And that's the thing. They fight against it. They don't want to look at the evidence. They don't want to accept it. And you're going to see that trend as we go on here. Conclusions. Number one, fossils are not always located in the correct layer. So if evolution's true, simple, more complex, we don't see it. Old fossils show signs of being much younger than millions of years because, again, they can't be preserved that long. We see that things don't stack up for evolution. But, like I said, there's two places we can look. We can look at fossils and we can look at living things, okay? Now, there's a man by the name of Richard Dawkins, and he's probably the most obnoxious atheist I've ever known, okay? He is just in your face, we are stupid, ignorant people that believe in creationism. He says all kinds of awful things about God, a God that he doesn't even believe is real. He somehow feels the need to bash him. and very obnoxious. And in an interview, he let something slip. I don't think he really realized what he had said. And I'm not going to read the whole quote here, but focus right here. And I suppose it's possible that you might find evidence for that if you look at the details of biochemistry, molecular biology, you might find a signature of some sort of designer. He was saying he doesn't believe in God. He doesn't believe in a creator. He believes in evolution only. Evolution's a fact, but maybe you could find a signature in the cell. So, let's take a look. This is going to be just a basic thing. Two types of DNA. When you look at a cell, here's the cell, okay? All kinds of parts to it, and the first kind of DNA you've seen probably before is called nuclear DNA, and it kind of has this double helix look. You've probably seen that before. And there's also another kind that's found in these little, what are called mitochondria. These are kind of the little furnaces or things that supply the energy for the cell. And there's mitochondrial DNA that kind of looks like these rings, okay? They're kind of like take those double helixes and kind of join the ends, and they're kind of these ring things, okay? Now, when you look at these two kinds, the first kind is more like a schematic. So like this here, I don't know if any of you in the past worked on cars, but back in the day you'd get these manuals for like a particular car, and it had like schematics of everything, the carburetor, everything. It would show all the pieces, where the bolts go, and all that stuff. And so when it comes to this part of the DNA, that's what that is. It basically gives you all the details, okay? So like back in the day, you couldn't get a manual for a Ford and work on a Chevy, right? They're different. And so what happened was everything is very specific and different, and that's what this is. This DNA is very different for all the different kinds of animals, okay? This is a lot simpler. This has 20,000 genes in it. This has 37. And this type of DNA is easier to compare different animals against each other. It kind of reminds me of an odometer, okay? It doesn't matter if you're talking about a Ford, a Chevy, or a BMW. We all know what the odometer says. It's telling us how far has the car moved, right? It doesn't matter about, where does the carburetor go, where's the battery go. It doesn't care about that. How far has the car gone? And this here does serve as a type of odometer for the animal or the species, okay? So, there was a study done just last year. And this scientist decided, I'm going to look at all the mitochondria DNA. There's been a lot of work on the regular DNA. A lot of work on the mitochondria DNA. And I'm going to compare different species. I think he looked at 100,000 different animals, okay? And it's two guys here, Mark Stokel and David Thaler. And here's a statement right out of the article. Together published findings last week sure to jostle, if not overturn, more than one settled idea about how evolution unfolds. You see that all the time. It's like, how many times can it be upturned? How many times can it be jostled? It just means, what are we going to do to keep this thing alive? Continue on. The study's most startling result, perhaps, is that 9 out of 10 species on Earth today, including humans, came into being 100 to 200,000 years ago. Now, I don't agree with the number, but when you start talking about thousands, you're like, scientists are getting closer, okay? We're not in millions anymore, we're to thousands. But let me kind of put this in another way to make it a little simpler to understand. In other words, they look at the mitochondria of all these different animals, and the odometers read the same number. That was not expected, because some they think go back hundreds of millions of years, some go back 50 million years. How could they have the same number? What that means is, at one point there was an Adam and an Eve, or two people, okay, two parents. And then at the same time as those two human parents, there were two cows, there were two dogs, there were two snakes, there was two of every kind of animal at the same time. This is what science is saying. It's not what Ken Ham's saying, this is what science is saying. That there were two of every kind at one given moment in history in the recent past. Let me give you another picture. This is what evolution was saying. Snakes, they go back 100 million years. Wolves, dogs go back 60 million. Cows go back 2. People go back about 200,000. This article found, no, the cows actually, the first 2 cows on Earth were at the same time as humans. 2 dogs, same time. 2 snakes, the same time. What does that look like? Doesn't look like evolution to me. Another thing in the article, there's actually a section called Darwin Perplexed. This is not a Ken Ham article. This is their article. And yet another unexpected finding from the study, species have very clear genetic boundaries and there's nothing much in between. In other words, they look at animals from the mitochondria, not from speculation. They look at the mitochondria of these animals and they find that they're not just like, oh, well, this is kind of like this. I could see how it transitioned over. You know, an ape is kind of like a human. I could see. They find that they are very distinct, very distant from one another. The absence of in-between species is something that also perplexed Darwin. Darwin had some major things we've already looked at that he had questions about his theory, and today they're just getting confirmed. They're not being, it's not like he had those concerns and they're going away. They're getting proven to be true, and those concerns should show that evolution is not real. Evolution unsettled. A couple other quotes here. This conclusion is very surprising, and I fought against it as hard as I could, Thaler told AFP. Where did we see that? Scientists are fighting against the evidence. Why? If you're being objective, why are you fighting against it? Because you know what it means. It's bad news for evolution. That reaction is understandable. How does one explain the fact that 90% of animal life, genetically speaking, is roughly the same age? Let's piece it together. First off, when it comes to these fossils, they believe that they are rapidly buried. Okay, that is not disputed. That is what they believe. Scientists believe there was a catastrophe that resulted in a massive death of animals. Scientists believe that the vast majority of species are the same biological age. They don't go back hundreds of millions here and 20 million here. Same age. Scientists believe there are clear genetic boundaries between species. These are their statements. What does the biblical account give? When you look at the Bible, it fits everything. It doesn't unsell the Bible. It doesn't jostle the Bible. We don't have to overturn everything. We already knew there's no transitional forms because God created all the animals. Complete. Kind begat kinds. They were distinct. And we also know from the Bible that man is special. Because if you think we all come from evolution, then man is just another animal. But the Bible made it clear that man is special. In Genesis 7, we see signs of catastrophe as a worldwide flood. We see rapid burial. And on top of that, we see a moment in time where there were two of every kind of animal. The same time in recent history that science is now agreeing with and are fighting against it. Nothing in the fossil record contradicts the Bible. It just keeps proving it over and over again. So here's the bottom line. If evolution's true, then you one day are going to be nothing more than just another fossil in a rock layer. And if that's the case, live the way you want to live. You're just an animal. And animals have died before, and animals will die in the future. But if the Bible is true, and all these things are pointing towards a worldwide flood, we looked at 2 Peter 3. But the heavens and the earth, which are now by the same word, are kept in store, reserved unto fire against the day of judgment and perdition of ungodly men. We have proof of a past judgment that points to a future judgment. And the question that we have to answer is this: are you ready for that? We have to look no further than God's law. God gave us his 10 commandments that we might not look at that and say, look how good we are, but to look at that and say, how do I stand before a holy God? Have you ever lied? There is no excuse. Have you lied before? If you have, it makes you a liar. Have you ever stolen anything? Even if you thought you deserved it, it makes you a thief. Have you ever been angry at someone for not a good reason? Jesus said that's the same as murder. Have you done that? Been angry at someone for not a good reason? Have you lusted after women? Have you lusted after men? That's adultery in God's eyes. These are the things that we look at to see if we will stand in that day, because it is appointed unto man once to die, and after this the judgment. If you stand before him, will you be innocent or guilty? And if you're guilty, what hope do you have? And the answer is Jesus Christ. When he came to the earth, He lived the perfect life you couldn't live. He went to the cross, he died, was buried, and rose again. And what we must do is stop putting faith in ourselves. Take whatever faith we had in ourselves, our good works, going to church, being a good person, cast them aside. They're worthless, they're dumb. And put our faith in what Jesus Christ has done for us. And then we can be born again. And then we can be here, and we can stand here not worried, but say, you know what I need to do is I can go out and now share it with others. And so I don't know what your state is spiritually today. I don't take for granted that anyone's saved. Because there was a time where I thought I was saved and I wasn't. And so I will give forth the gospel. But here's the thing. If you are saved, don't let it stop here and just say, oh, that's neat. I'm glad I know that information. Take that warning and go out and give it to someone else. They need to hear the gospel. I hope this is an encouragement to you to do that here today. Let's close in prayer. Lord, I just want to thank you so much for your goodness to us. And it's just exciting to look over these things and see that your word is true. It doesn't matter how many degrees you have in this world. It doesn't matter how much funding you have, how many people agree with you. The question is, what has God said? And I just pray that everyone in this room is saved, but if there's someone here that's not sure, maybe there's something they saw here today that's just really got their attention and they want to settle this matter, Lord, I pray that you would give them the courage to come forward and be saved. I also pray for all of us, Lord, as we just review these things, that you would help us have a greater appreciation of you. Lord, I pray that it wouldn't just end with, here's some nuggets of information I know now, but that we would be renewed in our dedication to give the gospel to our friends and loved ones and help them understand that this is real and it's not something to be played with. And Lord, I just pray that you work on our hearts and help us to make the decisions we need to here today. Praise in Jesus' name. Amen. Pastor.